are called.
Be seated. That's good stuff. You can get on history.com yourself and read the story of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. I won't tell you all of it, but you may know they were convicted of espionage for passing atomic secrets to the Soviets. They were tried and they were convicted. This is during World War II and after. And so many were mad about it that they would have done that, betrayed the good old USA, and they were executed for their crime. June 19th, 1953. Just so you know, they maintained their innocence until the end, and there are some still today who believe they were just scapegoats. But no matter what you think, no matter what happened, most everybody has a problem with someone betraying a nation or a friend, and it's especially ugly when the betrayal of trust is about money. 2 weeks ago, we watched as Judas, one of the chosen 12 of Jesus, handpicked by him, went on his own to the chief priest to deliver Jesus over to them. That was the agreement. I'll give you Jesus, you give me 30 pieces of silver. And it happened. It was going to happen. Matthew 26, verse 16 says, from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over, and here it comes in just a short while. Let's start in chapter 26, though, starting in verse 17. Then on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover? He replied, go into the city to a certain man and tell him the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. Every Jewish family right about now is preparing. Lots of plans were being made. People scrambling as all these visitors have come to Jerusalem. We need to eat the sacred feast. Where are we going to do it? Through miraculous means or earlier preparation, Jesus gets it ready, sets it up. The disciples do as he asked. They go to this man's house. They set things up. It's prepared. The sun is setting. It's time to gather to eat, and they do. And sometime during this meal, Jesus has some things to say. Verse 20. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they're eating, he said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. They were sad and began to say to him, one after the other, surely you don't mean me, Lord. Surely you don't mean me. What Judas had already done and what he was about to do is no surprise to Jesus. I think you know that. Jesus knew it. He prophesied it. And remember, he'd already picked him. Intentionally picked him, because this, even Judas, is part of the plan. And Judas is no chess game pawn for God to play with. He is doing what he wants to do, and God's sovereignty is using him in his selfishness to do just that. So Jesus says, one of you will betray me, and they are saddened and they are shocked. And how could one of us? And so they start asking, it's not me, is it, Lord? Surely you're not talking about me. They couldn't believe it, just couldn't believe it. Well, if they want to know, he starts narrowing it down, not from all of them, but to one of them. And since they're asking, he singles the one out and describes the moment that should have then been clear. Verse 23, he replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to the man, woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would have been better for him if he had not even been born. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, the one he's talking about, said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. Jesus answered, you've said so. If you've grown up reading some of these in the Gospels, this situation, this circumstance, it may be hard to understand. It's not that it's controversial, not that it's really hard to know, but what happened there? I mean, if Jesus said, here's what's going to happen, and they saw it, how did they miss it? I've been trying all through Matthew to not go to the other Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, see it together. That's why they're called the synoptics. John is sometimes different. I try to stay right here in Matthew, but John does help us here, describing this scenario on his account, chapter 13. If you want to read it, you can. But Peter's not next to Jesus at the meal, so he gets John, who is next to Jesus at the meal, to say, ask him. So John asks him, and he gets specific. Not so much saying this about sharing, but I will grab it and hand it to. I will share it in that way, and that'll be the betrayer. So he does it. And it says in John's gospel that Satan enters Judas, and Jesus says, what you're about to go do quickly. And listen to the next line, though, in John. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said that to him. They guessed, if you read, but they guessed wrong. So back to Matthew, Jesus says here's what's going to happen. And when they have this moment where Jesus and Judas share the bread, the bowl, notice what doesn't happen. Everybody at the table doesn't go, I knew it. Judas is the one. Of course he is. I always knew there was something fishy about Judas. That didn't happen. Jesus said it. They shared the bread. And either the disciples did not see the moment or did not understand it, because when he gets up and leaves, apparently they're as clueless as they were before. Maybe they're so worried about who is going to do this that they don't even notice what Judas is doing. It's not me, Lord. Surely it's not me, Lord. They didn't understand it. So they're asking Jesus while Jesus is having a moment with Judas. And he even asked the question, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi? And I wonder if it's significant that he doesn't use the word Lord like they did, but just teacher. Makes you wonder if the distance is already obvious. Judas probably thought everything he had done up till now was a secret. His meeting with the chief priests, his negotiation, the money in his pocket. He probably thought nobody knows it. But when he asked the question and ready for a negative answer, Jesus gives him a positive answer. Yes, Judas. It's just like you said. At some point, I figure he leaves, Judas, probably shaken just for a moment. He's going out to make good on the promise. He's going out to make the rest of the deal go down. We know exactly what price he got. What we don't know right now, and maybe Judas doesn't either, is what price he's going to pay. We know what was given to him. We don't know right now what's going to be taken from him. But Jesus says very, very clearly, in case you missed it, woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would have been better if he had not even been born. The disciples don't understand it. I don't even know if Judas really understands it, but he will. He will. Then Matthew goes on to tell the rest of the meal what Jesus says, verse 26. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and we had given thanks. He broke it, gave it to the disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. And when he took the cup, he gave thanks, gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. And I tell you, I won't drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And when they had sung a hymn, then they went out to the Mount of Olives. For the Jews, remembering that night in Egypt, what God did, it's a sacred privilege every year to do this. The Lord had told them to do it. I figure they wanted to do it too. They ate the meal, the roasted lamb, the bitter herbs in the bowl, of course, the bread and the wine. And at different times, as they remembered and spoke of Scripture and talked of history, they would each take their glass and drink more from it. Jesus is transforming this familiar meal, this common meal, this sacred meal, into something that is more than just a meal. He's remembering something, telling them to remember something. It hasn't even happened yet, but from this moment on, that moment will be something more, a kind of freedom they have not really known yet, a new kind of thanks in their heart. Oh, sure, he talked about his death, but now he gets more specific. His body and his blood given for them. It's getting real and it's getting close, and he moves from the blood of the lamb on the doorpost in Egypt to the blood of the Lord, the perfect lamb, on the cross in Jerusalem. I don't know if they understand it as they eat the meal. Frankly, I'm not sure we still understand it, even though we do it every week. We just thought about it, we just sung about it, we just read about it, and we just took it. And every Sunday we took it, and I'm grateful for it. We taste a little bit more of the cracker, the unleavened bread. We taste a little bit of the juice, and we remember not so much the night this happened, but the night when he would die, when he would sacrifice himself, his body, his blood, given for them, given for us, given freely for all of us. And the death he died and the covenant that he brought and the whole experience of the cross as his body is tortured and his blood is poured out. And it's all, as he says, Matthew says, Jesus says, for the forgiveness of sins. And don't miss that line. I know we repeat it often, but don't miss the point of that, because it is the point of the whole story. For the forgiveness of sins, it's the reason we do it. It's the driving force behind God to bring it about. And thankfully for us, it is our result of His dying. That's why, again, every week we celebrate, we remember, and we are grateful. He did that. He did all of that for all of us so that all of our sins could be taken completely away, so we could get all of His forgiveness and receive all of the redemption, to be righteous again and live with Him forever. It's powerful. I won't say more about that, even though there's a lot to say, because in about a month, Matt is going to spend our whole time in worship focusing on that. So we'll come back to that later. Looks like right about now they sing the hymn and they walk out of the place. I don't know where they are now as he keeps talking. Are they walking down the steps? Are they going through the street? Or they're walking through the arch, through the gate? Are they walking across the Kidron Valley? Have they headed up the hill to the Mount of Olives? Are they up there and already starting to enjoy the moment or the pain of the moment? Somewhere along the way, Jesus has some more to say, and they are not going to like this. Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it's written, I'll strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But soon after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." What? All of you. What? Every one of you will fall away. You will be offended by me. You will leave me in the dust. You will turn your back and you will run. Every one of you, and they don't like it. How could they like it? But Peter has to speak up. Of course Peter has to speak up. Verse 33, Peter replied, "But even if all fall away on account of you, Lord, I never will." And I'll bet he said it just like that. I never will. No doubt Peter believed it. I believe with all my heart. He believed it with all of his heart. But Jesus can't let it stay there. He has to correct Peter, and it's painful for Peter to hear it, but he has to know it. "Truly, I tell you," Jesus answered Peter, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Ouch. Peter, early in the morning, is telling this humongous statement of faith, a moment of clarity and commitment, speaking of great sacrifice. "Even if it kills me, Lord, I would not leave you." But Jesus refutes it. He tells him, "No, Peter, it's morning, and by the time evening comes, you will deny me, disown me, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And again, I say, ouch. Now, instead of just listening to that and leaving it there and letting it sink in, Peter doubles down on his statement, verse 35. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same thing. A noble speech and meant well, Robertson says. No doubt Peter's committed to setting the record straight. He's got to know, the Lord has to know how truly committed I am. And he loves the Lord. And he is committed. He wants to please him with all of his heart. He just cannot believe right now that what the Lord has said can be true. He can't. He determines it's not true. So he corrects Jesus' correction of him. He disagrees with him, and powerfully so. Jesus has always been truthful, always been accurate, always been right, but now, Lord, you missed the mark. Peter must know himself so well that he would say, "I know you mean well, Lord, but listen, I know me." Trouble is, he hasn't quite understood yet that the Lord knows him better than he knows himself. I think Peter believes it. I think you need to know this too. Peter and Judas are not the same. Very different. I think we need to point that out. From where we stand, we can see it even if they didn't see it. Because Judas knew what he was going to do while he was with Jesus and the disciples, and he played the part of a hypocrite flawlessly. Peter, however, Peter believes this. He is no hypocrite. He's completely wrong, but he's not faking it. He means what he says. He just doesn't know how weak he's going to be in the moment. Right now, Peter means it and tells Jesus he's prepared to die, but he won't. The other disciples say the same thing. Good old Peter, he will do exactly what Jesus said he would do in a short time, and we'll keep reading the rest of the story, but later. But later. A couple things I do want to point out. First, Jesus knows. I think even our children who are down to Little Lambs know this, but let me tell you in case you forgot, Jesus knows. Jesus knows Peter and Jesus knows Judas. And both are about to do something terrible to Jesus, against him. But again, one is playing a part, acting like he's close to Jesus, while the other fully intends to be close to Jesus. One gladly gives him up, the other is surprised when he does so. One plays the hypocrite while acting like a true disciple. The other is a true disciple, but fails at doing it. And Jesus knows. He knows them and he knows us. And let me say what others have said before us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He is not fooled this morning. Let's not act better than we are. Let's own up to the truth. We can all betray Jesus. We can all disown him. We can all act as if he isn't what he claims to be. Maybe we haven't done that. Maybe we have already, and maybe some of us way too many times. So it's a good time to start with honesty. We can be Judas. We can be Peter if the circumstances are just right. It is within us. McGee says, you may say, oh, I wouldn't do that. Are you sure? He says, are you sure? He says, I would if Jesus didn't keep his hand on me, and you would too, and that ought to keep us close to him. It's not that we couldn't do what Judas and Peter have done to whatever extreme. It's knowing we could do it. So our job is then to stay as closely to him as we can, to lean on him so completely, to rely on him so consistently that we would not do what is possible for us to do. As he strengthens us and carries us and refines us, that we could somehow through the journey be much more like him and a whole lot less like us. Second thing is, we need less words and more reflection. Peter's so quick to speak. That's why we love Peter, but it gets him into so much trouble. He says something before he really thinks about what he's saying. And how many times I have been like Peter. I feel the need to speak. I need to say something when I shouldn't have to, and I shouldn't. I feel like I should say something instead of just sitting in silence and letting the truth of the moment sink in. James says, be quick to listen and slow to speak, and I need to listen to that wisdom and do it more often. We all want our words to be good and true, but how we live is more important than what we say. And instead of speaking so much and maybe singing so much and maybe saying it out loud so much, we ought to contemplate a little bit more and be honest. Erdman thinks about those disciples at that meal and thinks about us in our communion time and says, it should be a time of deepening devotion, an expression of real affection, but it is there in the meal when we should cast ourselves anew upon his promised grace by which alone we can pass in triumph through the trials and the gloom of those lonely nights. If you don't know how dark it's going to get for the disciples, read ahead. If you don't know what's coming for you and how dark it could get this week, I don't know either. But I know what will carry us through temptations and darkness and trials and troubles, and it is Jesus. It is only a solid faith in Jesus, a relying on him. How could Judas and Peter have eaten a meal with Jesus and then gone out and did what they did? Do you know? Before you are quick to condemn, just make sure you know it can happen to us too. We have just eaten the meal. The taste of bread and juice is still on our lips. And before the day is out or before the week is out, we might relive what happened to one of those two men. It's a little embarrassing to hear Peter say, I'm going to do this, Lord, and then not do it. But I don't want to be too hard on Peter because I have been in Peter's sandals. Maybe you too, huh? I think Peter meant every word of it. His heart was right. He wanted to do it. He just couldn't. He wasn't lying. He just couldn't hold to his promises, and I have done the same thing. Since the day I was baptized, I can tell you about that day. Since that day, I have promised the Lord what I would and would not do. I have said at times, I will always do that, Lord, and I will never do that. And I have done that and not done that, and I've proved myself to be disloyal. And I've had to confess to my Savior and my friend that I did not do what I should have done, and I did exactly what I should not have done. One more thing about Peter, though, if you know the story. Peter said he would die for Jesus, and he didn't. But one day he would. I don't know if you know the rest of the story, but I figure Peter has some maturing to do, and his faith has to grow. And just like me, he has a mixture of failures and faithfulness. But one day his words would come true. If tradition is right, then one day he would be on his own cross. They say upside down, dying for Jesus. So when he says these things here, he's wrong and he's right. And I think if I know Peter, if he is anything like me, he will spend the rest of his life as I will, trying my best to prove my words are true till my last breath. Let me press again the humility. I think our first job is to come clean. We are sinners. At our best is not good enough. So no pretending. If there's any pretending in church, it should be kicked out. While we might want to look down on Judas and Peter, let's at that moment hold the mirror very close to our eyes and look deeply at our own hearts and our own history and be honest with who we are and what we have done. And while we're honest about ourselves, it's a good time to be honest about the Lord too and hold on to what He does well. Jesus says to Peter, you're going to disown me, deny me 3 times. And all of you are going to flee. And that's why he quotes from Zechariah, I'll strike the shepherd and all of the sheep will be scattered. And they would do it. They would run for the hills, save their own hides, and leave Jesus in the dust to die alone. But don't forget what Jesus says right after those words. But after I have risen, I'll go ahead of you into Galilee. We know what the disciples don't know. We know what that means. I assume they heard it and didn't really hear it because they're still thinking about what all of this means. They're worried about their own failures. They're thinking of his death, maybe, but not his resurrection, I suspect. But after his resurrection, he will be there waiting for them. And I love that. As they turn their backs on Jesus, he refuses to turn his back on them. They would run from him, and he will run after them. While they argue about whether they will fail or not, Jesus is already looking past the failure. He's looking for the time of forgiveness and redemption and usefulness when their embarrassing moment is behind them and he welcomes them again. And I love that because Jesus already knows before we leave this building when we will next fail. You may not know your week, but he knows. We have high hopes that we will not this week disappoint him, but he already knows when and where and how we will. And what awaits us after those failures from this week and the ones after that will be a Lord who is standing there waiting. He is already in our future. He already knows what he will do when we come back to him and say, so sorry for that moment. He will be there where forgiveness is offered and love is abundant and grace is overwhelming, and he calls us to serve again. Back to the first point I was making, and we'll call it a day. Jesus knew it. He knew them. He nailed it. He said it. He foretold it. He prophesied it, and they could hardly believe what he was saying was true, but it was. And I got to believe that while Jesus is going to be so disappointed in what they will do, that it actually will kill him, literally kill him, he will gladly do it for them. He will go to the cross and die by himself on his own, carrying all of their failures and their sins, while they betray and deny and crucify him. He will take it and bear it and be crushed under it, and will do it because he loves us that much. He knows us and he loves us. and with what we have already done and will still do, as embarrassing as it might be, in our selfishness and sinfulness, with a slap in the face of a holy God, He will still be there to love us as we turn back to Him to forgive and say, "And I will use you again." What a story. I don't know what you need today to be immersed into Jesus Christ, to ask for forgiveness, to suggest some prayers and say, "Help me," then we'll do it. Come if you need to. Let's stand and sing.